So a coach I support in our one-on-one coaching program, he makes a tough decision a couple weeks ago. He drops a player from the starting lineup, and he drops this player because the player's performance hadn't cut it, and their behavior was unacceptable as well. It was well below the team standards. Now, this was still a hard decision for the coach, one that probably could have been or even should have been made a month prior. But like most coaches, we're afraid of crushing a player's confidence by dropping them from the starting lineup. We're also afraid of their anger, their retaliation, their attitude issues, them not liking us, and potentially their family members also taking issue with our decision as well. Anyways, this coach makes that decision. He sits the player down. He tells them the truth. His performance isn't good enough, and his behavior has been unacceptable. And the player doesn't just fail to respond well in that moment, but their attitude completely tanks. And then you know what's coming, right? The parents call the administrator, and there's this meeting to talk about how the coach has made this athlete miserable, is responsible for their loss of the love of sport, has ruined their life, and the coach has an agenda and is an idiot for not playing them. But in this case, it doesn't even stop there. The parents, with the player in the meeting, personally attacked this coach, criticized not just his coaching, but his efforts to be transformational and him as a human being. And I mean, they just blast this coach. And then on top of that, these parents sit behind the bench the next game and mock the coach, criticize the coach, are cussing the coach out. Fortunate enough for this coach, the administrator stepped in and said, hey, no more. And if you continue to act this way, you're going to be banned from the games. And that's not, this coach is lucky in that, because that's not all administrators. But still, this coach has to finish this season coaching this player. And he has to have the courage to continue to see the person behind the behavior, to treat him and his parents with respect, even though he has been shown none. Here's the thing. Out of the 22 coaches I am currently coaching in this period of the year, I can easily name 5 or 6 who have faced a very, very similar situation. Players rebelling because they are held accountable. Meetings with administration because of emotional harm that disappointment has afflicted upon the athlete. Parents sitting behind the bench, cussing out the coach, or sending nasty emails. And this is not just at the youth or high school level. It goes all the way up to NCAA Division I. No joke. Now, today's episode, it's not about the fragility of today's athletes. It's not about the crazy parents or the administrators or team leadership that don't support us as the coach. It's about the thing we actually need the most in these situations. Courage. Courage. The great theologian and philosopher C.S. Lewis said, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality. It's just so true if you think about it. If I am only loving when it's easy, when it's convenient, am I really loving? No. All right. When others are indifferent to us or hurt us, it takes courage to love. It's harder than ever. Our love is tested. If I'm only selfless when it's easy, when I have an abundance of time, money, or whatever I know I'm supposed to give, but I fail to give when it's hard, and instead focus on my own wants, am I really selfless? No. Courage is doing what you know is right when what is right is needed the most. Courage is doing what you know is right when what is right is needed the most. It's living according to our principles in the face of adversity and resistance. And so today, we're going to talk about what courage looks like in coaching and why it's so important. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I'm JP Nervin, the founder of TOC, which provides coaching for leaders, as well as practical tools and systems to help you grow as a leader and build your culture. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Nate Sanderson. Also behind the scenes on our team, we've got Jacob Skinner, who helps with production, note-taking, marketing, and getting out each episode of the podcast and our weekly newsletter with the notes to each episode. If you'd like to get your hands on those notes, be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter at tocculture.com. Other thing, podcasts, well, they do cost money to make. And if you haven't noticed, we don't have any advertisers on this podcast. And because honestly, when I listen to podcasts, I find that annoying and just skip through them, to be honest. Also, we don't do Patreon or any of those other services where we ask for money. If you spend money, I want it to be on something that furthers your development as a leader and culture. And so if you're looking to further invest beyond listening to this podcast, I'd encourage you to check out a few things. One is my book, The Culture System. And the other thing is my older book, Calling Up. The Culture System is a very practical book. You can get it at Amazon and on Audible. It's on audiobook, and it's full of practical ways to build your culture, as well as it includes some case studies and some other unique stories of how to put these ideas into practice. Calling Up, if you haven't read it already, is a fable story of a coach going through a lot of challenges of becoming a transformational leader. In fact, if today's episode really resonates with you, it might be the book you need right now. And the stories in the fable are based on many of my experiences, as well as the experiences of coaches I coach through our one-on-one coaching program. So, Calling Up and The Culture System, check it out. All right, now let's get into our conversation today. Nate, I have to say, our last 2 episodes of the podcast with AIC hockey coach Eric Ling, for those that haven't listened, please do. He was really inspiring. And what was most inspiring to me, it wasn't his unique ideas he had on culture building. Those were good. It was Lang's courage. The courage needed in coaching seems only tougher and tougher to muster. And I think that's because the adversity and the resistance and the challenges only continue to grow for us as leaders. We're afraid to hold players accountable or drop them in the lineup because we're afraid of how that player might respond, or we don't want to lose the next game. We're afraid of having hard conversations with a member of our staff because we don't want to risk making that relationship awkward, or we want to be liked by our coaching staff. And I know coaches who are afraid of even walking out of a locker room after games because they don't want to face the look of disdain on some parents or fans' faces and them coming up to us. I know coaches, and I've been one of them, and we're afraid of cutting a player or removing them from the team and the player is absolutely killing the culture. And it's hurting the experience of everyone. But we don't want to do it because we know the response from parents or the lack of administrative support might put our job on the line, or because we think we need that player to win.
Well, JP, I think coaches can identify with all of those situations that you described and think about those moments where, we've felt this anxiety or we've felt this fear about what's going to be on the other side of this door if we don't play this kid, if we stay with this strategy, if we keep doing things the way that we think is best for our program. We can all identify with the pushback and the criticism that comes from that. And I think one of the things that's additionally unique to being a transformational coach is that the courage required here, I don't know if it's different or if it takes another level of conviction to be committed to this transformational approach. And here's what I mean. If I'm sitting back here and I'm saying, okay, this year's team, I think we got to play 2-3 zone defense. That's going to give us the best chance to be competitive. And here are my reasons why. And at the end of the day, I get some criticism because, well, they've always played man-to-man here, or dad always played man-to-man when he was in high school, or whatever it might be. There's a certain amount of courage that you have to go with what you think is right. But at the end of the day, you, dad, or the administrator, or whoever else are in agreement that the goal of this defensive strategy is to win games. So you're aligned in the sense of where we're trying to get. There's just a difference of opinion in how to get there, of course. And in reality, you may be able to be successful in one way or the other, and you've made this decision for whatever your reasons might be. But what's hard about being a transformational coach is that the alignment is not always there. It's harder to say we're going to prioritize relationships and character and leadership development and the experience that we're creating for each other in the process of trying to win games, but also being very real about the fact that at the end of the day, if I can only choose one of those things, either we're going to be a winning team or we're going to create a great experience that's going to grow people, I'm going to choose the experience that grows people, that has a lasting impact. Mom, dad, administrator, even sometimes the players might think, well, wait a minute, we're here. The purpose of this team is to win games. And so when you don't have the alignment on the most important value or the most important destination, so to speak, with your team, I think the headwinds there can be a little bit stronger than when it's just a strategy decision, when you're aligned on the idea of winning. And this is the thing about being a transformational coach. is that we kind of have to come to terms with that in the beginning, recognizing we're sort of counting the cost here that, all right, if we're going to make a commitment to doing it this way because we think that's the most important thing, that means we're going up the rough side of the mountain. That means that we're going to be flying in the face of a lot of conventional wisdom here. And that's going to probably create more obstacles, challenge, and adversity than if we were at minimum aligned on the fact that we're just trying to win games.
Yeah, I think what you just shared there is so important. I wish I heard that about 8 years ago, Nate, because I thought, all right, here we go. Transformational coaching. I'm all in. Right. And people are going to love it. Right. Because I'm changing and I'm caring more. I'm loving my players and I'm investing in them. And it's not about, the wins. It's about who they're becoming through the experience. Right. And, some people do. They get on board. They love it. They support it. But there's a lot of people that don't. And a lot of people that fight that because they see this relationship. They see this as a transaction. And they're looking for, what am I getting? Right. Am I getting to play, or is I've invested so much in my son or daughter's career. Why aren't they playing? They came all the way to your school to play, and they're not getting to play. So it's not, or they're administrative, like, what is it costing me? Right. Oh, it's costing me time. It's costing me stress to have to deal with these, uprisings or these meetings. And so we just kind of want to move things, sweep things on the rug or just kind of ignore it. They just, people just don't feel like it's worth it to join us and doing things in this way when there's resistance. So I think your reminder, coaches, is so powerful, because I think so many people are like me, and that we think, okay, I'm trying to be about players. Everyone's going to appreciate that, but not everybody does, especially in the moment.
Well, JP, as you were talking there were a few flashbacks that came to mind in terms of, where have we experienced those moments where it feels like I'm making a courageous decision. So, I think on a couple of different levels for that, just in terms of my own experience. Number one, and when I took a job at Linmar, and in the interview process, it felt like they were valuing a transformational experience, that they wanted girls basketball to sort of become the North Star in terms of how to build culture and that sort of thing within the athletic program there. And so it seemed like when we took the job that we were aligned in terms of our purpose and our values. Well, as time went on, it became very clear that that's not what parents wanted. That's not what a lot of the players wanted. And eventually, I'm not sure it's what the administration wanted either. And there come these moments, JP, where it feels like you're swimming upstream and you have to make a decision. Am I still going to have conviction for the things that I said were most important when we started this whole process in the beginning? And what's very difficult about that, when maybe the players aren't bought in, maybe the administration isn't bought in, the parents are resistant, is it's a very lonely place. And there's a temptation there to become like a chameleon and maybe compromise on a few things that maybe you tell yourself aren't the most important. But eventually, if we do that too often, Parker Palmer says in one of his books, we do violence to our own soul when we don't value the things that we're built upon, that are most important to us. And so it is worth it, I think, in those moments, regardless of what your outcomes are going to be. And the outcomes weren't great for me, but walking away from that situation, knowing that this is what we believed in, and it made it somewhat more palatable to know that we were true to ourselves, despite the outcomes there. I think another place where coaches probably experience this a lot is just in playing time. I mean, I can think of examples, again, going back to that situation where we got all kinds of heat in year 3 to play the seniors with the loudest parents. And that is, if there's any one thing that I believe in when it comes to playing time, and the kids hear this every year all the time, is that playing time is earned, and it's earned by your performance. It's not earned by your parents sending emails or calling the AD or, complaining or threatening to transfer or any of those other kinds of things. It's not earned by what club you play for, or what you did last year. It's earned in competition with your teammates for time. And so, again, we faced a situation this year where one of our starters, maybe our best player, arguably, just had a horrendous practice. I mean, just meltdown, not playing hard, pouty, complaining, whatever. And at the end of practice, our coaches come together and they were adamant Like, look, we can't start her tomorrow. We just can't. We can't reward that kind of behavior by putting her in the starting lineup, especially when the two players behind her were doing everything that we normally do as part of what our character as a team is. And they were right. And so we didn't start her. And, that took about 3 or 4 days to get through, just the impact that had on that individual and, other things. But again, we had to be like, to protect the culture, we had to be faithful to reinforce the values of who we are and how we practice. That was a courageous decision, I think, for our staff. And there's a third aspect, JP, that I think sometimes, courage comes into play. And this really has to do with some of our coaching PTSD. Maybe when we've done something in the past that wasn't well received, or it didn't turn out well, or we got criticism for, and we might feel like, it would work with this team, but there's fear that, it's not going to, because it didn't in the past. And as a specific example, we have a team dinner tonight. We're doing a little bit of an appreciation activity. And there's a speech that I've sort of felt percolating in my heart over the last week to 10 days with our team, that I've just been weighing, like, when's the right time to give this speech? It involves some stories from my past and past experiences. And whenever I told stories like that at Linmar, people just went berserko. Like they resented it, and they were angry with me because I was like, you're coaching here. Why are you talking about what you did in the past? And so I feel anxiety even now thinking about sharing a couple of these stories tonight. But again, does it benefit the team? Do I think it's something that would honor them? I really do. And I just have to have the courage to move forward, even though there's some of that anxiety and fear that's saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't be vulnerable, don't put yourself out there again. We have to have the courage to fight through those memories and those traumatic experiences that linger with us as well.
One thing too, you also shared there that just kind of resonated something with me, was when we're about transformational coaching or a style of coaching or a way of doing things, and people reject that, it feels very personal, because it feels like they're rejecting us, it's so much of our coaching does, and our values do get tied up with, how we see ourselves and who we are. And so it takes a lot of courage and a lot of conviction to be different, because the way that we're talking about coaching and the way we aspire to coach, it is different. It's countercultural, which is why we get so much resistance internally within our team and externally to the culture that we're trying to create, which comes back to Eric Lane saying of guard the culture, guard the culture. Guarding means that we're actually getting some, resistance, or under attack in some ways. And that's, that's the truth. Now, I want to kind of jump from, we've kind of outlined a little bit of our issue and the reason why we need courage, but, how do we start to build and grow in courage as coaches? I think we should spend some time unpacking that. And I think the first thing I would want to share, Nate, is that first off, we've got to know what we're about. We've got to know our why. We've got to know our values, really, our principles. And, as my mentor years ago, Jamie Gilbert, used to always say, real, like, mental toughness, which in this way I'll say is even courage. Real courage is our ability to live according to principles regardless of the circumstances. But in order for us to live according to our principles, we have to know what they are. We have to know what we're about, and we have to be super clear on them, so that when we are faced with certain decisions, we know in that moment, hey, this is what I need to do. This is what courage looks like. This isn't me being stubborn, right? Because there's a difference between courage and just being stubborn. Well, this is the way I want to do things, and I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to run this zone or this, that. I'm not listening to feedback, and I'm shutting myself off from other people. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is I have a set of principles, of things that are really important to me, things that are, what I value, are part of my identity. And I'm not going to give up on those things. I'm not going to sacrifice those things. So we have to know what those are first. Now, once you know your principles, you know your why, I think you need to build a discipline to revisit them. And for me, this has been journaling. And at the start of every year, I take time to write out the previous year's principles. And, it's in the front of that journal, and I'm continuously adding to those principles year after year. But as I go through the year and I face different difficulties, I look towards those things. I look at those things. I revisit those, and they help guide my decision-making process. In fact, when I was working with Jamie Gilbert, my mentor, back in, I think, 2016, he actually had me do what he called the principle circle activity, I would write that definition of mental toughness, which is, living according to principles, not by my circumstances. And on the outside, looking at the day or some of the challenges I might be facing, I would put outside that circle, I would put the principles that might best help guide me through that moment, through that challenge. And, I don't do that very often, that activity itself, but I feel like I revisit those things enough throughout my day or throughout my year that, especially when I'm in those tough moments, that they help to guide my decision-making process.
Well, obviously, JP, when we're in those seasons where courage is required, it's helpful for us to have people around us, people that can remind us of our principles, people that can remind us of better days, people that are on board with our purpose, right, in terms of what we're doing. I remember, when I was going through that situation at Linmar, that there were 12 people, I could list them now, that were around me during that season. Some of them were on our staff. Some of them, were coaches in the community. It was you, it was my wife, my dad, that some of them didn't have any connection to basketball at all, but they all were able to hear parts of the story that I could call up and get advice from, get perspective from. And that was really, really valuable, just to help me keep my head above water. In a lot of ways, those relationships are like the little floaties or the life jacket that just help to lift you up when it just feels like we're sinking, as we're trying to cling to some of our convictions and some of our values in those difficult moments. Our friend Sam Allen from Point Guard College had an interesting thread kind of on this subject a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that he said was important for coaches to do is just to reach out to each other. I can think of a situation this year when we came out of break and we played a top 10 team and got blown out by 20, and kind of one of our worst performances of the year, and beat myself up on the way home and watching the film after the game. And I get this random text message from another coach in our league that watched the game. And he just said, "Hey, you guys are a lot better than you were last year." And just like, he knew what I was likely feeling after the disappointment of that game. And just to sort of speak that life of, even though you guys lost tonight, you're way better than what you were. And that was really powerful, and I think about all the times and opportunities maybe that I've missed to be able to do that for someone else in our league or somebody else in our area that I know is going through a tough time or dealing with injuries, or, you hear they're getting some heat or something like that. So I just think the more we can look out for each other, whether I'm on JP's board of directors or not, whether we're rivals or not, we're all sort of in this mess together, and we're all going to go through something at some point. And so the more I can have my antenna up to try to encourage others when I see that they might need it, I think the better off we all are in this coaching profession.
And I think what you'll get, as you do that, as you encourage other coaches, you'll get more in return. You'll build relationships out there. And I think that so often in coaching, we think we're the only one going through these struggles, and so it's great encouragement from you and Sam there on that. There's two other things I would kind of just leave us with today, and one of those is we have to have a level of conviction, and we can't just be talk, but we do need to really make sure we are clear what we are about. And we talked about knowing what you're about, but you also have to share that with people. The more we can communicate our principles, and what is important to us and our why, the better. And Dave Brandt used to always say this. He was a coach at Messiah, and now he's coaching soccer at Bucknell. He's talking about preparing the soil, So when, and it's not just in the recruitment process, which is, I think, a lot of what he was referring to when he talks about preparing the soil. But I want to be constantly talking about what's important to me and my principles and how that affects my decision-making, so that when we do get into a moment of adversity, of struggle, of resistance, I can just point back to those, not just for my own good, but for the other people. It's like, listen, I get it. I get you're frustrated. I get you disagree with, but this is what I'm about. This is who I am. And so that helps us to have a level of conviction to speak with conviction about what's important to us. And I think that takes courage in and of itself. And the last thing I think I would share is this. When I look at coaches like Eric Lang, when I look at coaches like you, Nate, coaches that have a lot of courage that I admire and have a lot of respect for, I think coaches like that, like yourself and the Langs of the world, the Dave Brandts of the world, I think they are more afraid of failing to live according to their principles, to going against what they believe in their values, than they are afraid of losing their job, losing a game, or losing popularity with even the players on their team. And I think that to get to that place, you have to just to know yourself. Back to the very first thing I said, I think that these coaches, they know what they're about so much. They talk about it all the time. They live it, they breathe it. It's not just coach speak. It's really part of who they are as a person, not just who they are as a coach. And I think that's what it has to be about. And so to have courage in coaching, I think it comes down to you having integrity and courage in the rest of your life.
Well, I think at the end of the day, JP, we want to get to this place where we know who we are, we know what's important to us, we know what we believe in, we know what we believe provides the most value for our players and for our program and for the community at large. And when we make that commitment, there's also this acceptance of that may mean we don't win as many games. That may mean that we're going to face criticism. That may mean that eventually this isn't the right fit and I choose to go somewhere else, or I'm chosen to go somewhere else. But I think the ultimate goal for coaches would be to find that place of peace where we can say, this is who I am, and I'm okay with whatever the consequences are that follow being committed to the values and the principles that are most important to me. And that can be elusive. It can be hard to get to that place, but there's an incredible amount of strength and courage that you'll find when you do.
Okay, just as we wrap up, one more thing you might want to consider investing in within your coaching is some strategy. It takes courage to go to war, but it takes courage aligned with a good strategy to win the war. When it comes to playing time, which is often the greatest support of resistance, or the greatest source of resistance, complaints, and issues, I have a whole system of strategies, tools, and methods, and team activities to help you win, win, win. It's a win for you and your time and your sanity and your emotional well-being in the season. It's a win for the athletes and their experience. It's a win for the team and the level of buy-in, and it's going to be a win for parents and administrators who want to know we are treating our athletes fairly and we are treating them with respect. To learn this system and to get all the accompanying tools and methods, go to tocculture.com and you can purchase the course and tools there. Jacob will also be sure to put a link in the details of this episode. Thanks to everyone who invests in their coaching by purchasing our books and online courses. And thanks to everyone who just takes the time to listen in. And thanks to the people who leave a review of our podcast. And thanks to everyone who shares episodes of the podcast, whether that's on social media or just sending links to friends and family.